And of course, what he had neglected to tell my parents was that his family was away up in the Catskills. So no one was home except for him. So I went to, this happened when I was about 13 or 14, I can't remember exactly, but I flew to New York and he picked me up. He was the coolest guy in the world. He was very charismatic. He was very, again, the Yiddish word geschmack, you know, and I was here, a little kid, 13 years old, and I was getting more attention than I'd ever gotten in my life. And he took me out to amusement parks, and he took me out to eat all the time, and it was great. And everything about it was positive, except for when it came time for me to sleep at night. The question became is where I was going to sleep. And so ultimately what happened, without going into detail, is that I ended up in his bedroom, and I never really thought, and I had never really thought twice about it, because I grew up, you know, in a yeshivish house. Nobody talked about anything to do with anything sexual, let alone to know about the parts of your body, anything like that. And so this whole thing, as ridiculous as it sounds now, was not irregular to me back then. And so I of course went along with it. And of course, psychologists these days, if I could borrow from their terminology, will use the term he groomed me. So he prepared me, got me comfortable. And so basically every night I had to endure being molested by the guy, but all the while this was happening, nothing really went off, as crazy as that sounds. Nothing ever went off as problematic because everything else was so great. So I just thought, wow, he's just like incredibly warm or friendly. I don't know what I was thinking. I was a kid. And so this went on for a little while. And, you know, ultimately I returned home. And honestly, I really never thought anything of it. It just sort of was this experience. For whatever happened, happened. But nothing really went off as a terrible alarm, oh, this is horrible, etc. And it wasn't until I had been away for about 5 years. I had been in Israel. By then, you know, I had left Yiddishkeit for a while. I was all conflicted. I was always clashing with everything. So I was home for the first time in a few years, and it was just this time of year. It was just before Sukkot, and it happened right. Everybody knows before the Aguda became the Aguda, it used to be Rabbi Hecht's, so it was the Bikr Cholim across the street, and the Aguda was in the other thing, just for sake of credibility here, and it was Sukkot, and I was in shul, and it was that pause that you have between, you know, I think it was Kabbalah Shabbos or something, and before they daven Mariv, and I looked up and I saw him there, and I said, oh, let me go say hello to him, and I started to walk over, and just then, like a ton of bricks, it just hit me. The whole story just hit me, and I basically froze in my tracks and spun around and bolted out of there crying. I ran home. My mother answered the door, very surprised that you know, I had shown up, and seeing that I was upset, she asked me what was going on, and I told her. And as I've described this many times, it's not that she didn't believe me, it's just that she had so much trouble accepting what I had just told her. This was as though I used the expression, I told her like the Martians just landed outside. And of course she had no idea what to do, and my father was, you know, came home and she told him, and the same thing. And nothing really became of it. It was just, again, not from anybody who knows my parents, they're good people. It wasn't that they were trying to do anything sinister, it's just that they didn't know what to do either. And so this sort of festered on for a while, and it wasn't until 2 weeks later that one of the Rosh Yeshiva, who obviously in the yeshiva that my father taught at, one day called me out of the blue. and asked me to come to his home. And I had no idea why he had called me. I went over there, and he sat me down, and he asked me a very simple question. 18 years old, not married, no children. He asked me, would I trust my children with Avremel Manderovitz? And of course, that was his way of, tzniustika way of asking if I was molested. And so the rest of it all kind of went into a time warp, really, because there was never really any follow-up with that. Once that story came out, I never really heard what had happened. This was in 1984, and ultimately, what it's clear to me now is that that was the exact time that in New York they had finally figured out what was going on, and unfortunately, it was not the Jewish children that had sounded the alarm, because they had already been pressured into not speaking, but it was 6 Italian kids who had ultimately cooperated with the police. There was all these interviews, and by the time everybody sounded the alarm, he, of course, who's a very smart person, figured it out, bolted out of there, and when I saw him then, that was Sukkot's time right before he fled to Israel. And thus began, a whole story after that, in which I unfortunately do not have the time to go into specifically. But I wanted to share the story with you just because it's important here that every person, every parent, have an understanding of how this type of thing happens. Okay, and it really comes down to, there's 2 observations, and then I will yield to the next speaker. But the takeaway from this is, number 1, I cannot stress how important it is to have the type of relationship with your children where children don't feel sort of like second-class citizens, like you're just a kid, what do you know? There's an expression that one of the other organizations used to have. It was called Believe the Children. And so many kids have so much to say, but the problem is today, it seems that no one is listening. And so it all starts with how you have a relationship with your children. And the ability, needless to say, you have to educate your children that there are predators out there. You have to be able to have the type of dialogue with your children that this issue, the issue of not even sexual abuse, but just an awareness of what their bodies are, and then of course, the reality on the street. There are people out there that are out there, unfortunately, to hurt them. Most people are wonderful, but there are people who have sinister intent. You have to be able to be aware of that situation. If something has happened, the dialogue has to already be in place. The relationship has to already be in place so that even if the child was threatened, and don't tell if you tell your family, how many times have you heard that? You tell your family, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to kill your family, et cetera, et cetera. If the relationship is there, if the dialogue is there, if it's not a taboo subject, it's done within the confines of Torah Yiddishkeit. It doesn't have to be, blatant, et cetera, but there are appropriate ways, halachically appropriate ways to talk to your children so that they're educated. There's a great video presentation that it's a video of a speech that was given by Rabbi Binyamin Yudin that I was fortunate to attend to. I always try to mention this. It's available on torahweb.org, and in there Rabbi Yudin speaks about teaching your children about the birds and the bees. And it's a very worthwhile thing to listen to, and it gives you a very good insight halachically. The second thing that I would just love to take advantage of, and that's where it all comes around to what I was saying before about being from Chicago. The issue of stigma, which is really, if everybody thinks about it, stigma is what causes this to happen. We have come to the point in society where whatever the reason, a lot of people will throw around the shidduch word, but whatever it is, we have come to the point where people are so trapped in society where whether they're worried halachically about lashon hara, or whether they're worried about reputation, or whether whatever it is, people are paralyzed to talk about it. So not only are they jeopardizing the lives of their children, but at the same time they are also aware of something that is a menace to the entire community, and it is irresponsible to do that. There is no basis for that in any kind of Judaism whatsoever. We're supposed to have achdus. We're all supposed to look out for each other. And the bottom line is that if there are people out there who are hurting our children, it is our responsibility to make sure that the correct authorities, together with the Rabbanim, if it's something that you absolutely must do, and we are going to hear, of course, from people who are representing authority today, but everybody needs to understand that the correct people need to know about this thing, and it cannot be a source of insecurity and stigma. And I think that in this historic occasion in which we are finally seeing ourselves, I had used the word, I had thought about this word for a long time. I'm sorry. Pardon me. Oh, I'm sorry. This was an important word. I thought about it for a while, and of course I can't focus on it in here now. The words that I had meant to use was that we are presenting a united front with the Rabbanim. And the reason why I use the word united front is because I don't want to stand here and say that I am partnering with Rabbanim or whatever. I have my role to play. Of course, Rabbanim, I don't want to take on the role of what the Rabbanim have to do. But I think this is a tremendous opportunity for Rabbanim to teach and for people to be inspired to learn from Rabbanim what needs to be done so that whether it's the Rabbanim teach people about halachas of lashon hara so that they know that they are free to go ahead and report this to the authorities. Whatever it has, and the other thing is that Rabbanim need to teach people that stigma is not the reason why you hold off on something. So halachically, people need to understand what the dangers are by keeping things to themselves. I appreciate very much everybody's time. I'll yield to the next speaker. Thank you.